Hey there. Happy Wednesday. How's everybody doing? Doing good. Episode 12 of the Transforming Anxiety podcast is live as of this morning. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about habits. Are we ready? Let's see. Okay. We're on episode number 12. In episode 10, I introduced you to the 3 pillars of my system for freedom from anxiety. So pillar number 1 we talked about last week is mindset, and I truly believe that is the most important work that we can do. It's the most important work I think I do as a coach. I think it's the most important work I do as a human being. I think it's some of the most important work I do as a parent, as a wife, as a friend. I just think mindset, getting and keeping your mind clean is one of the best things you can do for yourself. So that was episode 11. Go back and check that out if you haven't already listened to that. And there's an awesome cheat sheet that goes along with that. This week, though, we're talking about habits. So habits are the glue that set things like the mindset piece, which we talked about last week, and the lifestyle piece, which we're going to talk about next week. They take those elements of the work that we do, and when we know that we consciously want to make a change in our mindset, we know we consciously want to clean things up, we know we consciously want to make a change in our lifestyle. Maybe we want to eat better. Maybe we want to exercise more. Maybe we want to take better care of our financial health. All sorts of things go into the lifestyle piece. We'll talk about that next week. But when you consciously know that you want to make a change and you're practicing this change and you're creating new practices, you're creating new routines, you're trying new things out, the best way to send things from this energy-filled, effort-driven, conscious place, which is where you're really thinking about it all the time. Picture that 16-year-old who's learning how to drive a stick shift, right? And it takes every ounce of their conscious mind and their conscious thinking in order to learn this new skill. There's a lot of effort that goes into that. But when you take that and you send it into the unconscious part of your cognition, right? You're basically putting it on autopilot and you're helping your mind and your body basically to automate this new practice or this new routine. That is habits. That's the magic of habits. So creating habits around the things that you really, really want to have in your life, like I said, whether it's cleaning up your mind and doing a daily thought download, maybe that's a habit you want to cultivate. Or maybe there's a habit where you're just paying attention to what's going on in your mind. You're practicing unintentional and intentional models, right? Those are habits that you could cultivate that would help you clean up your mind on an ongoing basis. On the lifestyle side, maybe it's a habit around getting up to work out every morning, or maybe it's to drink more water, or maybe it's to have raw vegetables at every meal, whatever it is, right? When you create a habit around it, you don't have to think so hard about it. You don't have to consciously pay so much attention to it because your unconscious mind has now taken over because you've got all of this just set in stone. It's just rocking and rolling. So that's the magic of habits, and that's why it's the second pillar of this system to freedom from anxiety. Because I think the more that we can set things in place, the more that we can just kind of cement them and automate them, the easier it is. And I'm all about making this easy. So 2 things, I've got a cheat sheet for you, and there's a link in the notes for this video. You can go to kellyhanlonmccormick.com/podcast/12 to grab your cheat sheet all about habits. But I talk about 2 different frameworks in the episode of this episode of the Transforming Anxiety podcast this week, episode number 12. And the first framework is based on Gretchen Rubin's work in her book, Better Than Before. She opens that book with a framework called the 4 tendencies. Now, before I explain this, I want to be very careful about how I talk about the 4 tendencies. In Gretchen Rubin's book, and kind of in her work overall, she uses these 4 tendencies as kind of just a fact about who you are. So she would use, whatever your tendency is, she would just state that as part of the facts of a person. I don't really like that. To me, if you go back to last week and you remember the fixed versus growth mindset that we talked about, to me, if you accept a tendency as a fact and you never challenge that, you never do any work on that, you don't want to make sure that that's the best tendency for you in every situation, then I think we're falling a little short of the work that we could be doing. So I offer the 4 tendencies in this work and in this cheat sheet purely as a starting point. I think it's good to know. I think this is a great tool for self-awareness. I think this is a great tool for understanding where your mind goes when it's on default. But I don't think this is the end all be all. So I don't want you to use tendencies the way that she keeps describing them in the book, which is that it's just kind of a factual part of who you are, okay? So I want to be very careful to say I love and adore Gretchen Rubin. I think her work is amazing. I also find it limiting. And I think this work that we're doing here and the tools that we have here are what take those starting points and take it to the next level. Good? Okay. So the 4 tendencies, these in no particular order. The first one is upholder. Oh, wait, let me back up a second. So the 4 tendencies are based on so when she was thinking about habit creation and she was talking about, she was studying and kind of figuring out like, what is it about habits, right? The first thing that she came up with was that habits are based on an expectation, okay? So whether it's an internal expectation, something like saving more money, right? Or volunteering more, right? Keeping up with a New Year's resolution. Some of those are internal expectations that you might want for yourself, or whether it's an external expectation. So this would be something like, a request from your boss, or a request from your mom, or things like traffic laws. Those are external expectations, right? So the 4 tendencies are based on how people respond to both internal and external expectations. Make sense? So the first tendency is upholder, and upholders are like super stringent rule followers. If it's an internal expectation, if it's an external expectation, they are going to rise to it. They are going to meet it. No problem, no struggle. They are just expectation meeting machines, right? They can be a little stringent because they really like rules. So if you have an upholder in your life and you see, there's a rule, whether it's an internal thing that they want for themselves or whether it's an external expectation that somebody has put on them, then they're very particular about following the rules and meeting those expectations. That's the upholder. So the next one is an obliger. Now you'll find upholders are the smallest percentage. Well, is that true? I don't know. It says something in her book. Upholders and rebels are the smallest. Obliger, which is the next one, obligers readily meet external expectations, but don't do so well with internal expectations. So if you ask an obliger to do something, they're likely to fulfill that request. But if they want to do something, they struggle trusting themselves and finding themselves reliable to follow through with what they want to do, okay? So obligers are very reliable for other people. They make great employees. It's great to have an obliger in the family because they're the person you can count on to make the dinner or to clean up or whatever. Those people are very good at meeting external expectations. These people are also very good with accountability partners. If they do want to start something like running, and it's an internal expectation they have, they would do well to find an external accountability partner that they, who expects them to show up to meet them to go run. That would help them to meet their expectations. So obligers are good with external expectations, not so hot with internal expectations. Then there's questioners. I'm definitely a questioner. Questioners will meet internal or external expectations as long as the expectations make sense to them. They're not going to do anything willy-nilly just because somebody said. Like if the boss makes a request, but the request doesn't make any sense, they probably won't follow through with it. The questioner really needs to understand why the expectation is there in the first place. So even internal expectations, if the internal expectations don't make sense, they're not going to follow through with them. If they're not really based on sound logic and sound reason, they're going to struggle to follow through with their internal expectations. So questioners ask why a lot, and everything needs to make sense to them. They can be very reliable and they can be good rule followers if the expectations make sense to them. Okay, so that's a questioner. And then the last tendency is a rebel. Rebels just don't like expectations. Internal or external, they're not going to follow expectations. Rebels act more in the moment. What do I want right now? What sounds good right now? So they're not necessarily thinking about the future version of themselves or their long-term best interests, whether it's at work or whether it's personal. They're just kind of acting in the moment. They're very present, fly by the seat of their pants sort of people. So rebels and upholders are the smallest percentage of people. Most people are either obligers or questioners. Now, a questioner, hi Kylie. Questioners and, what was I going to say? Questioners and obligers. So these are most of us, right? And you can probably identify yourself in one of these four tendencies. Most people are kind of drawn to one that they see like, oh yeah, that's totally me, right? We all kind of have elements of each of them, but there's one that we're pretty strongly tied to. So like I said, Gretchen Rubin presents this as like, I'm Kelly, I'm 5'4", and I'm a questioner. Like those are all equally factual bits of data. And I don't like that idea. I think that's a really fixed mindset approach to this. I like the idea that my natural default is to be a questioner and that I can challenge that, right? To go back to last week's tools about mindset, I can challenge that belief. I can challenge that story. I can look at the thoughts in my mind that are causing me to have questioner tendencies, and I can see what feels right. Who do I want to be here, right? And I can start moving from an unintentional model into an intentional model. So, but all of that said, I think this is a really great tool to use for self-awareness. I think this is a really great 101, like where are we starting from? What's your natural tendency, right? And treat it as a tendency. Don't treat it as a fact. So that's the first part of the cheat sheet. That's the first part of the podcast. The next part is James Clear's brilliant work in the book Atomic Habits, which I think I've talked about 3 times on the podcast already. We're only on episode 12. So that's like a fair amount of time spent on James Clear's work, but it is so good. So his work draws from Charles Duhigg's work, which is a book called The Power of Habit. And in that, he had really explored how corporations and huge businesses, things like Target and Starbucks, really use consumer habits to market, to place products, all of that kind of good stuff. It's actually kind of scary when you really get into it. But James Clear took that work and he created, he didn't create this. This is more of a discovery process, right? The 4 phases that our brains go through when we're in this neurological feedback loop of executing a habit. And it's cue, craving, response, and reward. So these are the phases that our brains go through. These are the phases that we execute when we're in the midst of a habit. So think about things like brushing your teeth, how you get dressed every morning. I know, like when I'm getting the kids ready, I always make their lunch first, and then I do their snacks, and then I do their water bottle. I don't know why. It's just the habit, right? So there's a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. Now, he took that and he made this brilliant framework called the 4 laws of behavior change. And based on the fact that we go through these processes, cue, craving, response, and reward, he said, okay, if we want to create a new habit, how are we going to do that? Knowing that this is the loop of a habit. Or if we want to break a habit, how are we going to do that? Again, knowing that this is the loop that our brains go through. So with the cue, you've got to make it obvious. The more obvious a cue, the more likely your brain is to recognize it and say, I know exactly what to do now, right? So things like time and location are great cues. They're super obvious. They happen all the time. It's just an easy, super obvious cue, right? Readily available. So cue, make it obvious. Craving. Now this may seem a little obvious, but this is worth looking into when you really start digging into the habits you want to create. The craving has to be attractive, okay? So the craving is that part where your brain is starting to really want the dopamine hit, right? That little burst of good stuff, neurochemicals, that comes when you're executing a habit for the reason that you execute a habit, right? Because you're heading towards the reward. The craving is you're starting to like get the idea that you're going to get that reward. So you've got to make sure the craving is attractive. So the cue, make it obvious. The craving, make it attractive. Then there's the response. This is the actual execution of the habit. And I go through an example that makes this really simple and pretty obvious in the podcast episode. But the response has to be easy. So make it easy. If the response is really, really difficult, you're not likely to create this habit. It's just going to be too much work. So even in things like if you're starting a new workout routine, he says things like, exercise for 2 or 5 minutes. Make it really easy in the beginning. You'll eventually build on that. But in the beginning, when you're truly in habit creation mode, make it easy. If you're going to go and say, okay, now I've got to run for an hour, you may do that for like a day or 3, but that's not going to be easy, right? You're going to get sore, you're going to get tired. That's not going to be easy. Make it easy when you're in habit creation mode. So then the last thing, the reward. Again, this may seem like a no-brainer, but again, it's worth thinking about. The reward has to be satisfying. So make sure that when you're creating a habit, that the reward that you get at the end of the habit, that neurological feedback loop that you go through, the habit or the reward has to be satisfying. Now, a lot of times, especially where things like exercise and even food are concerned, the reward is a really natural internal dopamine hit. It's pretty easy, right? And that's super satisfying. Our brains love an extra dopamine hit. So with things like exercise, where you're releasing all sorts of great neurochemicals into your body based on movement and based on an elevated heart rate and all of that good stuff, you're getting this very natural, satisfying reward of a dopamine hit. But there are other ways to reward habits, and he goes through this in the book. It's so many examples, so much research. It's so cool. So cue, craving, response, and reward. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. So I put all of this in a cheat sheet for you so that you can lay it all out, because I like to have these things handy and simple. And I talk about, in the cheat sheet, I go through I give you his 4 laws of behavior change for creating a habit, but also the inverse of them is true if you're looking to break an old or bad habit, something that's not working for you or serving you anymore, or just something that you could maybe make more efficient, right? I think sometimes habits can be kind of neutral. It's not that it's necessarily the best habit or the worst habit, but you can make them work for you better, right? You can make your habits and your unconscious mind, that neurological feedback loop that you're going through automatically when you see that cue, you can make them work better for you. So this is all about habits. This is all about how to automate what you want to have in your life so that you don't have to spend so much energy, so much effort, so much conscious effort going towards what you're wanting to create. You're automating this stuff so that your brain is just going through the loop, right? So fun. When you've got things like mindset and lifestyle on lock and your unconscious mind knows exactly what to do and how to do all this, super simple. Super simple. Now remember, this is small stuff. This is stuff like brushing your teeth. This is also really big stuff. This is stuff like your eating habits, how much alcohol you drink, exercise habits, spending habits, habits in your relationship, all sorts of habits. So this is small stuff, but this is also really big stuff. So that's it for today. Come grab your cheat sheet over on the website, kellyhanlonmccormick.com/podcast/cheat 12. Be sure to download episode number 12 of the Transforming Anxiety podcast wherever you listen and love podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever makes your boat float. And I will see you again here next week on Facebook, where we'll be talking more about lifestyle and all of the little subheadings that go into this big element of lifestyle, because lifestyle is super important to pay attention to when you're trying to create your best life. So I hope you're having an awesome week so far. Everybody take care. Let me hear from you in the comments or DM me on Instagram. I'm at K Hanlon McCormick. I would love to see you there. And until next week, take care. Bye, guys.